Hey friend, please subscribe and like the video. 1 second for you. Big deal for me. They always said power makes you blind. I used to believe that meant greed, corruption, arrogance. But now I know, sometimes blindness looks exactly like loyalty. My name is Lydia Morgan, and for most of my adult life, I cleaned offices for people who thought I didn't exist. People like Thomas Gray, the CEO of Gray Tech Industries, a man who could make a room go silent just by walking in. Every morning, I arrived before dawn. While the city still slept, I wiped their fingerprints off glass tables, emptied their trash cans, and listened. You'd be amazed how much truth hides in an empty room after a meeting ends. That morning, the one that changed everything, started like any other. Cold coffee, stiff uniform, aching back. Until Thomas himself stormed into the office 2 hours early. He didn't see me at first. I was behind the reception counter, mopping. Then, without even looking, he snapped, "Whoever's cleaning, stop making puddles where I walk." His voice hit like a slap, sharp, careless, entitled. I mumbled, "Yes, sir," and stepped back. But what caught my attention wasn't his tone. It was the man who followed him in. Tall, confident, holding a folder marked Confidential Merger Files. I'd seen that man once before, months ago, after hours. He was from Raven Capital, a name that had been whispered lately in the hallways like a warning. Thomas waved him toward the conference room. "Make it quick," he said. "The board doesn't need to know about this yet." I froze mid-step. The board doesn't need to know? That phrase echoed in my head long after the door shut. 10 minutes later, as I pretended to dust the lobby table, the two men left. The folder, that same black folder, was still on the table. Forgotten. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But something about the way Thomas smirked as he left made my stomach twist. I opened it, just for a second, and what I saw made my knees go weak. It wasn't a merger. It was a buyout of the company itself. Signed drafts, hidden clauses, and fake subsidiaries, all leading to one thing: Thomas selling out his entire board behind their backs for personal gain. And to make it worse, the final page showed that one of the signatures was forged. The name of the CFO, a woman I knew well. She used to bring me leftover muffins from her meetings. That's when I realized this wasn't just greed. This was betrayal on a corporate scale. And the person about to lose everything wasn't just the board. It was every employee in that building. I stood there for what felt like forever, the folder open in my trembling hands. Then, I heard his voice again. "Lydia," he said sharply. I looked up. Thomas was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He'd never once remembered my name before. "How long have you been here?" "Just finishing up, sir." He took a slow step closer. "Did you touch anything on this table?" My mouth went dry. "I was just cleaning, sir." He stared at me for a long, dangerous moment. Then, with a faint smirk, he said, "Good, because curiosity kills careers." And he left. But that was his mistake, because mine had already ended years ago, and I had nothing left to lose. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about that folder, the signatures, the names, the lies. I wasn't supposed to be part of that world anymore, not after everything that happened 5 years ago. Back then, before the janitor's uniform and rubber gloves, I had a nameplate that read, Lydia Morgan, Corporate Legal Advisor. I'd spent 15 years building my career in law, 15 years believing that justice and integrity still meant something, until the day my own firm turned on me. They framed me for leaking confidential data to a competitor, something I never did. By the time I proved my innocence, my reputation was gone. No company wanted a liability, so I became invisible. But invisible people see everything. By noon the next day, The office buzzed like a hornet's nest. Something was happening. People were whispering. The board had been called in early, and security was suddenly tighter than usual. I was polishing the glass door outside the boardroom when Thomas's assistant brushed past me, muttering under her breath, "They're finalizing the sale today. Whole company. Gone." That was all I needed to hear. If that sale went through, hundreds of employees, secretaries, technicians, drivers, would lose their jobs overnight. Thomas would walk away a multimillionaire, and no one would ever know he'd forged the documents himself. But I did. I spent the next hours like a ghost, slipping from floor to floor unnoticed. Every executive had their secrets, passwords scribbled on sticky notes, files left unlocked, voices lowered only halfway. By 5 p.m., I had what I needed: emails, drafts, timestamps, proof that Thomas and Raven Capital were orchestrating a fraudulent takeover. But evidence means nothing when you're a janitor. If I went to the police, they'd laugh. If I told HR, they'd fire me. So I did the one thing Thomas never expected from someone like me. I went straight to the board myself. The next morning, I walked into the main conference room before the meeting began. The long glass table gleamed, empty except for coffee cups and silence. When the first directors arrived, I was still standing there, holding a brown folder against my chest. They frowned, whispering among themselves. Then Thomas entered, calm, charming, smug, the king walking to his throne. He didn't notice me at first, until I said, loud enough for the room to hear, "Mr. Gray, before you begin, I think you left something on the table yesterday." Every head turned. I laid the folder in front of him. The room went still. He stared at it, then at me, his eyes like cold steel. "Lydia, step outside," he said quietly. But I didn't move. Instead, I opened the folder, and page by page, I began to read. The forged signatures, the false subsidiaries, the shell accounts. Every lie, spoken out loud, in front of the people he thought he controlled. When I finished, silence filled the room so thick you could taste it. Then, finally, someone spoke. It was Eleanor Shaw, the CFO, the woman whose name had been forged. Her voice was steady. "Mr. Gray," she said, "would you care to explain why my signature appears on a contract I've never seen?" Thomas tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "You don't understand, Eleanor, this is—" But she cut him off. "No, I think we understand perfectly." He lunged for the folder, but one of the board members, a quiet man in a navy suit, placed a hand over it. "Security," he said calmly. Within seconds, 2 guards entered. Thomas's face drained of color. He looked at me then, not with anger but disbelief. "You," he whispered, "you did this." "Yes," I said softly. "I did." He laughed bitterly. "You're just a cleaner." I smiled. "Not today." They escorted Thomas out of the building that same morning. No shouting, no drama. Just the quiet click of his expensive shoes echoing through the hallway as security walked him to the elevator. He didn't look back. But when the doors slid shut, I caught his reflection in the mirrored surface. For the first time, he looked small, not powerful, not feared, just small. The board stayed behind for hours. I was asked to wait outside. Through the frosted glass, I saw silhouettes, people arguing, gesturing, pacing. Then silence. Finally, the door opened and Eleanor Shaw stepped out. She didn't say anything at first, just studied me. Her eyes were tired, but not unkind. "Lydia," she said quietly, "where did you learn to read legal drafts like that?" I hesitated. It used to be my job. She raised an eyebrow. "Used to be?" So I told her. Everything, the law firm, the false accusations, the trial that ruined my name, the years of silence that followed, and finally, how cleaning floors was the only job that didn't ask questions. When I finished, she didn't look away. She just nodded slowly, like she already knew the feeling of being erased. "You saved this company today," she said. "People like Thomas forget that integrity doesn't disappear when status does. It just hides, waiting for the right moment to return." She turned toward the boardroom, then stopped. "Be here tomorrow morning," she said. "We'll find something more fitting for your skills." I thought she was joking. She wasn't. The next day, my uniform was gone. In its place, a gray suit jacket and a badge that read, "Compliance Officer, Lydia Morgan." For a long time, I just stood there, staring at it. It didn't feel real. Not because I doubted myself, but because, for the first time in years, someone else didn't. Weeks passed. Thomas's scandal hit the headlines. CEO arrested in fraud case. Whistleblower saves hundreds of jobs. The photo under the article showed only his back, handcuffed, surrounded by flashes of light. They never mentioned my name, and I preferred it that way. I'd had my time in the spotlight once before. Now I just wanted peace. Still, every time I walked past the janitor's closet, I felt something. Not shame, but gratitude. That small, quiet space had been my refuge. The place where I'd been invisible long enough to finally see the truth. One afternoon, I noticed a young intern struggling with the copy machine. Frustrated, blushing, nearly in tears. I smiled and walked over, showing her how to clear the jam. When the machine hummed back to life, she sighed in relief. "Thank you, Miss Morgan," she said softly. "I was afraid Mr. Gray would have yelled at me." I chuckled. "Then it's a good thing he's not here anymore." She smiled shyly. "I hope I can be like you someday." I paused, surprised. "Like me?" She nodded. "You always look calm, like nothing scares you." I smiled. "Oh, I've been scared plenty. I just learned to stand still anyway." Months passed, and life at Graytech changed. New faces appeared, old ones disappeared. The board rebuilt the company from the inside. Smaller, cleaner, wiser. Sometimes I'd walk into the executive meetings and catch people straightening their ties when they saw me. They didn't fear me. Not really. They respected me. And that was enough. But no matter how far I climbed back, I never forgot who I was when it all started. The woman with the mop, standing in silence, watching a man's empire rot from the inside out. Because sometimes you have to be at the very bottom to see clearly who's standing on the top. One evening, as the office lights dimmed and the city outside turned to gold, I stood by the window, the same one I used to clean every morning. From that height, the world looked peaceful. But I knew better. Every glass tower hides stories like mine, of pride, betrayal, and the small invisible people who hold everything together. I thought about Thomas then. He'd lost everything, his company, his name, his friends. But the truth? He'd lost it long before the scandal, the day he stopped seeing the people around him as human beings. That's what power does when it's not earned. It blinds you, it isolates you, until the only person left to destroy you is yourself. A few weeks later, I received a letter. No return address, just my name, handwritten, elegant. Inside was a single line. "Thank you for reminding me what honor looks like." No signature, but I knew the handwriting. It was Eleanor's. I folded the note and placed it in my desk drawer beside a small, worn cleaning rag. The one I'd carried every day for years. A reminder that dignity doesn't come from status. It comes from standing up, quietly, firmly, when everyone else looks away. And if you ever find yourself standing in a room full of powerful people who've forgotten what's right, remember this. Truth doesn't need an invitation. It just needs courage to walk in.